Hi everyone. We're going to talk a little bit about professional development schools, and rather than walk you through each of the articles since you've already read them, I'm just going to share some experiences and try to link those back to what you've read. Also, at the end of this video, I'll share what your role is in terms of the Holmes Group pieces that you read or are reading prior to next week. So, title tells us that professional development schools are partnerships designed to bring about simultaneous renewal of both schools and teacher education programs. And this is the definition I use when I think about the purpose of professional development schools. To me, what it means is that we're focused on preparing new teachers through our teacher preparation programs. We're focused on supporting the professional development of current teachers through our teacher education programs. And then, in addition to that, we're conducting research on both of those entities and potentially larger entities that are of interest to the school or of the school cluster if you're working with multiple schools. So that's how I think about professional development schools. I have two examples of professional development school experiences that I work with, and I'm going to share a lot about one and then a little about another with you today. So the one we're going to talk the most about is the Urban Teacher Residency Partnership Program that we call UTRIP for short. This is a USF program that officially began in 2011, although the work leading up to it started in about 2009. So it began essentially by teaching one field-based course at a local primary school, Piso Elementary School. And that course was a reading assessment course, and what I did when I taught the course is I would teach the class, and then I would send my students out into the school to work with small groups of children, and then they would come back and we would workshop, and I would support them in thinking through what they would do next time, what it is that their children knew and were able to do, and how they as teachers would build upon that. And we then communicated what the students were doing with the classroom teachers of the children that we were working with. And this became a very small example of simultaneous renewal in that the students in my class were learning how to both assess and then make instructional decisions for the children that they were working with. And the teachers had an opportunity to do just a bit of mentoring, so with a little bit of feedback, and then also were exposed to potentially some new ideas for working with the children in question. Around this same time that I was teaching this course, a group got together and wrote a document called the Blue Ribbon Panel Report. And pretty much in any literature about teacher preparation at the moment, you see a reference to the Blue Ribbon Panel. And that's because they called for us to turn education upside down, or teacher preparation upside down, and really think about how it is that we prepared our teachers and become more intentional at the work that we do. So UTRIP ultimately was born of these things. At the start, we worked with 3 university area elementary schools. So the first year of the program, we had students across 3 schools. And then starting in the third year of the program, we increased that to 6 total schools. We're now working with technically 5 schools, although in a way it is 4 because 2 schools have merged together to form a K-8. It's just on paper they technically are still 2 separate schools. One of the schools did close because of enrollment, and so we are at technically 4 schools. So ultimately, the residents in our program, because it's a residency, it does come from kind of a medical model, although I it doesn't. But it has the sense that they're going to be in the field more often. So, for example, our residents are in the field for more than 2,100 hours over the course of their 2-year program, which is um, at least 3 times that of their peers in our other pathway programs to getting the same certification. So that's probably the biggest difference, that they're connected to the field as much as they are. In addition to that, because our cohorts are fairly small in the residency, we're able to fairly easily connect their coursework to what's happening in the field. We're cautious of this because although they are working with Hillsborough County Public Schools now, they may not always be. And so my goal is for us to never teach them to use the curriculum that's being used in Hillsborough County Public Schools, but to understand why they're asked to do what they are within that curriculum so that they can make adjustments regardless of where they end up teaching. In addition to that, there are 3 components of our program that I feel really set us apart from other programs across the country. One is that we have partnership resource teachers, and these are hybrid educators, which means that we hire them from the school district as a teacher on special assignment, and they work for the university. So they're essentially liaisons between the university and the schools, and they teach some of the courses. They're always out in the field, so they're working with both the pre-service teachers and with the school staff to really help make the program cohesive. Ultimately, we can't do the program without them because of the level of trust and the intensive hours they spend in the field. In addition to that, we also have a fairly heavy STEM focus in the 2nd year of the program, working very closely with the math and science directors from the school district. We developed a STEM professional learning community in which at times it's co-taught by the district resource teachers in science and math and our faculty in science and math from USF. And it's an opportunity for our students to plan for and then implement STEM-focused lessons, which is an initiative in the school district. It's been one of the areas where I feel like we have really contributed to the simultaneous renewal aspect because teachers in Hillsborough County were having a difficult time ramping up to these STEM-focused lessons. They didn't feel they had the background knowledge in science and mathematics to be able to make them successful, and so they were kind of shying away from doing them. And so the support that we provided our residents in developing them and thinking about how to implement them actually became a supportive tool for the teachers, because in some cases it was the first time they'd seen a STEM lesson fully implemented is when our residents did that for them. In addition to that, we also offer content coaching. So in the field in pre-service teacher education, there are typically supervisors who observe lessons and provide feedback. Often that feedback is sort of based on the generic understandings of how a classroom should operate. So behavior management, planning, but not so much focused specifically on the discipline being taught. The issue with that is that we know elementary teachers often go into elementary without secure understanding of the disciplines, specifically science and mathematics, but really the disciplines across the board. And so we're trying to accelerate their development in those content areas so that they feel more confident about their teaching in science, math, literacy, social studies, etc. So our content coaches are discipline-specific experts. So either faculty or advanced graduate students who go into the classroom or use a video model to really focus in on students' understandings of those content areas. We also try to support the CTs, the collaborating teachers, as much as possible with that content coaching. So they're invited to the conferences that we have with the students around their lessons, and in some cases, some of our CTs, our collaborating teachers, have also requested to go through content coaching cycles in order to develop their own understanding of the disciplines. So those are some areas that I think are extremely positive examples of simultaneous renewal that are both supports with the schools but also with the larger district. In addition to that, we really try to focus on maintaining communication with our partners. So our partnership resource teachers, who I mentioned earlier, run monthly meetings with our collaborating teachers to make sure that we're all on the same page, we're understanding the expectations for our residents in similar ways, and in addition to that, we're developing the mentoring skills of the collaborating teachers. We also hold monthly meetings with our principals and district representatives. These are called advisory board meetings, so that, again, we're all on the same page. We're coming to shared understandings of what the program expectations are. And starting this year, we're also then going to hold site-based meetings. So the advisory board meetings are meant for us to understand UTRIP broadly, the way that we all come to understand it. And then the site-based meetings will be used for us to think about how we support each school individually. What's resulted is that schools, largely our own partnership schools, are hiring our graduates, and they're recognizing their developed abilities compared to other hires that they've made, other new teachers. So this idea of accelerating their development, which I mentioned before, is something that's really important to me as a director of the program, that I would like for our residents to enter their first year of teaching essentially in a similar place as to a second year teacher has typically been. So that first year doesn't seem as overbearing to them and as stressful because they've kind of been there and they know what to expect. There are some major challenges to this work, which was touched on in some of these articles, although the solutions sometimes seemed a little too simple. Either that or I'm doing it really wrong. But I think one of the things I'll point out is from that Snow et al. Article, the poor quality of research in the professional development schools literature is really problematic, because what it means is that we don't have much to inform our work on. So this Blue Ribbon Panel report that I mentioned earlier, they essentially called for further development of professional development schools, but we don't really know what that means, what that looks like, or whether it works. So we're kind of on a faith and a prayer here, hoping that it will work, and having to sort of continuously evaluate ourselves because we don't have a lot of quality research to evaluate our work against. As I mentioned, it's not all roses and unicorns. There are a lot of barriers to this work, and the barriers are our own institutions largely. So USF and Hillsborough County Public Schools are both extremely large institutions. The right hand and left hand, it's not that they aren't talking to one another, they're not, but it also has a lot to do with the fact I'm not even sure half the time if the right hand knows where the left hand is and vice versa. So because of the size of these institutions, this idea of systemic change often reminds me of the Paula Abdul song from the 80s, Opposites Attract, because I always kind of sing in my head that you take one step forward and two steps back, and that seems to sort of represent this work of professional development schools. A lot of that has to do with the fact that you can never make everyone happy, which I know is something we should all learn, but ultimately every change you make has a domino effect, and even though the change may have been requested by your partners, they soon come to realize that actually that change isn't all that much better than what you had to begin with, and it seems like sometimes forget that they're the ones that requested the change. So you're kind of running around in circles, trying to do the best that you can to ensure that the time the residents are in the field are the most valuable time that they can be. What that also means is that sometimes our school partners don't recognize the importance of the coursework. They tend to believe that everything they can learn will be learned in the field, and we obviously don't agree with that, and so we have to we have to continuously remind them of the importance of the coursework in supporting their time in the field. There's never enough resources. And one of our big concerns is right now we're on a large federal grant, which pays for a lot of the resources we need. But once this grant runs out, we're not exactly sure how we are going to continue managing the program as it is, and what that will mean ultimately for enrollment. So one of the benefits is that we're able to give our students a scholarship each semester. It's not a lot of money, but it's enough that they can think about offsetting what they will lose in salary by not being employed in the hours that they're at school, to that experience that they'll be gaining in school. And USF isn't going to be able to afford something like that. Hillsborough County won't be able to afford something like that. So how do we make this attractive without the scholarship? Another thing is that not all time in the field is created equal. So many times what we find is that because our pre-service teachers are in the field so much, our school partners forget that they're novices, and the expectation becomes one of these novice teachers being treated like practicing teachers, as though they should have the knowledge and the experience to make the same decisions that practicing teachers would, which isn't the case, and shouldn't be the case, because they are novices. They need constant support and development, and we are always thinking about how to better support our school partners to really be thinking about that. There's a book, and I can't think of the author right now, so I'll have to share it with you if you're interested, but it's called Practice Makes Practice. And that's something that we do see. So if a resident is placed in a classroom with a teacher who may not use best practices in all disciplines, then what happens is our resident is practicing those not so great practices. So it's not that practice makes perfect in that case, it's that the practice makes practice, and we have to really be conscious about what that looks like. So I'm going to share in this post, I'm going to share an article that I wrote a few years ago that really describes the U-Trip program and talks a little bit more, highlights a little bit more some of these areas that I've talked about here. It's a short article if you're interested in reading it. And then I'll also provide a link to the U-Trip website so you can kind of have a look around. It's still a work in progress, but I think it gives you a sense of what we do. So on the flip side of that, you've heard quite a bit about the work that I do with the primary school here in the UK. We ultimately have 4 to 5 partner schools over here that we work with in our summer study abroad program. All of those schools are very much focused on teacher preparation. So we bring our pre-service teachers in from USF, in some cases in-service teachers in from USF, and we really think about how to support their development. We hope that in doing so, we are also providing some support for the teachers and leaders that we work with, but to this point, that hasn't been a primary focus of the work that we do. Now, at Cottenham Primary School, where I work, we have layered in teacher education in the form of professional development, as well as researching the work that we do. So of our 4 to 5 schools, I would say that is one that really has the workings of a professional development school. And we're having a huge impact at the school level. And I would say, quite honestly, a bigger impact at this one school in a professional development sense than we have in the 6 schools, or now 4 or 5 schools, back in Hillsborough County. And we're beginning to expand that work out through conference presentations and publications. So we're disseminating it and supporting growth outside of the school in that way. But it's really made me question whether systemic change should be our goal in professional development schools, or whether local change and development should really be our aim. So is it possible in a school district like Hillsborough County to actually create systemic change when you're working with 144 elementary schools? We certainly at USF do not have the capacity to be in all of those. And is it possible to make systemic change if you're not? I don't know the answer to that. It's something that I'm really pondering. But I can see significant differences between the development of the one school that I'm able to put my energies into the way that I do, and the extensive resourcing we do to work in 6 schools, only to again go back to my girl Paula and that idea of taking 1 step forward and 2 steps back on a fairly consistent basis. I think a big part of that is that the forces inside our partnership in Hillsborough County Public Schools really are nothing compared to the forces outside that are coming in from the broader school district and all of the expectations, requirements, and accountability that are part of that. So I think it's something for the professional development school literature to think about. I think while we can do a lot of good in preparing our pre-service teachers in a school that is a professional development school, kind of like title talked about, there's almost an element of being subversive in starting these partnerships in large school districts, because when you're on the fringes, as he says, you're able to kind of bend some rules and make some decisions, but ultimately that catches up with you, and you end up having to make a lot of changes and compromises as a result. Whereas when working with one school that does have a little bit more autonomy, it's not so much a bending of the rules as it is a revision of them. And I think there's probably something to that. So moving forward in your thinking, you've been asked to read one section of the Holmes report, Holmes trilogy. You most likely have seen it referenced in the articles that you were reading, because it was essentially the catalyst of the professional development work. What I'd ask your teams to do is to either create a 500-word overview of your section, so a narrative, no more than 500 words, or a 5 to 7 minute video, something like this. You could also include PowerPoint slides if you wanted to, or something of your choosing that kind of is along those lines. If you wanted to do part narrative, part video, or if you have a completely other idea, you're welcome to pass that by me. But ultimately, what I'm asking you to do is synthesize the information in your one section into something that is digestible by your peers. So if you have questions about that, let me know. That will be due next Wednesday, so just before class starts. And again, as a reminder, next Wednesday is when you're meeting in person with Stephanie and Sheridan to talk about the next bit of information. So I hope everybody is doing well. It feels strange to be talking to a computer and not see your faces, but I do hope things are going well, and please, again, don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks.